How's it?
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. Housing affordability and all the different plans the federal government, the provincial government, the municipal governments have in regards to increasing housing supply, making housing more affordable, changing a lot of the rules in regards to the way that we get houses approved, developed, etc., have changed in the last little while. So I thought it'd be good to check in with Leor Margulies, who's the head of the real estate legal practice at Robbins Appleby, a law firm in Toronto, who I've interviewed before. He's a very knowledgeable guy on what's going on and what does he think about it all. Leor, welcome to the show, sir.
Welcome. Thanks for having me. That's just why I love the real estate business. It's never static. You wake up the next morning and there's something else going on that they need lawyers to figure things out. So until they keep changing it, I'm going to keep doing it.
Good stuff. Well, let's go through some of the things in detail in a minute. But just from an overview standpoint, the Minister of Municipal Affairs or Housing, whatever his title is, made a big announcement just last week that made it far easier to develop housing, I guess, particularly within either major transit areas, close to transit areas. And then also what he did is he made a change in regards to cities allowed to increase their urban boundaries and develop more housing in those urban areas. This wasn't the Greenbelt issue. There was a separate issue on the Greenbelt, but this was just urban boundaries. Do you think these moves that the provincial government are making are helpful or are actually going to help housing supply?
Look, they have been the last 2 years have been doing things to, like I said many times before, trying to undo 15 years of liberal regulation and restriction on the housing industry, which has resulted into in large part, the housing shortage. So everything that they've done, the big one was in the fall, Bill 23, that is going to streamline zoning, reduce heritage roadblocks, reduce conservation authority roadblocks, reduce land tribunal roadblocks. These ones are just more sort of streamlining of the system to allow municipalities to expand their boundaries and do more with less regulation. The expanding the boundaries is also part of the problem. Is also when you have two municipalities with a shared boundary and you have developments that cross over. All these things are going to facilitate expansion. It'll all work only if the municipalities buy into it, because if they don't and they resist, the province can only do so much. And it's easy for municipalities to put up roadblocks on the development process if they want to. And I'm hoping they're going to get over the fact that the province has really, I don't want to say stuck their nose in, but made it a priority and really delved into their affairs. They've really changed the rules of the game for municipalities. And they've been very resistant, but I think that will change because the demand for housing is such that we have to find some dramatic ways to increase the supply. The province can only do what they can do. Ultimately, the big issue is the federal government has to come in a big way, because they're bringing in more and more immigrants, which is great. We're going to get 500,000 this year. And really, when you add the conversions of students and temporary workers, they're looking at 1 million last year. So where do you house these? You need to have more than just deregulation. You need to have money for affordable housing, and you need to have money for infrastructure. And the province can't do that. So we got the ultimate solution. It's not only what the province is doing. The federal government has to step up. And we're going to talk today about all the things that they tried to do, but it's all window dressing, because that's not going to do anything to really create supply, but it makes them look good.
Isn't the biggest problem, though, that there's a whole bunch of people that don't actually want housing prices to decline? There's a whole bunch of people that have built their net worth on house price appreciation. And they're the people that tend to vote, particularly in municipal elections where you have low turnout. And if you were a municipal politician and you did things to dramatically increase supply, the people that are benefited are new immigrants and young people and renters that are becoming house owners that don't tend to vote a lot. And the people that are hurt are all the older people that look like you and I that are going to be hurt because our housing prices are going to go down, our net worth's going to go down. So isn't this politically really difficult for municipal politicians to do?
Well, it is, because you have there's the two things that people like you and me, well, not you and me, but people like you and me, that may take the position that I've got wealth here and you're reducing it. Well, to be quite honest, that's sort of facetious, because it's wealth that's been created by the marketplace. You haven't done it, so you don't deserve it or earn it. Prices aren't going to go down, but we just want to ameliorate the increase in the price. But the bigger issue is also, the NIMBYism. 70% of Toronto is single-family housing. That leaves only 30% to build higher density, and it's not enough. And everybody wants more housing, but not where I am. So yes, that makes it difficult for municipalities, and that is exactly why Ford and the Conservatives have come in and said we're gonna take away that political limitation that you have, and we're going to make it easier. And here's the new rules of the game. So you have to do it. Now, so in terms of voting, they're like I said, they can put up roadblocks, but they can't do. They still have to ultimately deal with the legislation and the DC changes and everything else. So I think that's why that was needed. That's why they had to in part, sort of blow up the current system, because the NIMBYism is so entrenched, particularly in GTA with the ward system, that they have to do something. And that's why they continue to do it. People don't like it because they feel that they're interfering in municipal politics, but this is a bigger issue than, my house on the corner.
I agree with you, Leor. I think this is an issue of what's right to do. Right. It's intergenerational equity, where the system has benefited middle-aged and elderly people way too much and is harming younger people way too much, because my kids are going to find it very difficult, if not impossible, to buy accommodation in Toronto, with the Greater Toronto Area. And I think it's that, and I've said this before, government, both municipal and provincial, have been the problem here. Government is supposed to help us have a better society, a better community, better lives. And government has been the problem here, and they don't recognize it. They don't realize it. And they've got to break things up, as you've said, and do what's right for people and the economy long term. We're going to take a break for some messages and be back with Leor Margulies in just 2 minutes. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. Tonight's issue is housing. Our guest is Leor Margulies. He's the head of real estate legal practice at Robbins Appleby, a law firm here in Toronto. And we're going to go through some of the issues that both the federal government and provincial government have put in place in the last little while, and how they impact. We're going to ask Leor how they impact the housing sector, how they're implemented, etc. And so, Leor, you give me a list of the issues that we should go through. What about this foreign, trying to impact foreign purchases of housing? How have they done that, and is it going to have any impact?
Well, I mean, to date, certainly BC and Ontario have already impacted that to the extent it needed to be impacted. We can talk about that in a moment with the tax. Both provinces have imposed I don't know what it is in BC. It was at 20. They may have raised it to 25. In Ontario, it started at 15% in April of 17. It's now up to 25% for what they consider foreign buyers buying residential real estate in Ontario. So they've already created some great disincentive for buyers from buying, but doesn't stop them. The federal government, and they're, as I said before, they got to do something. So what they've done in their platform when they got elected a year and a half ago, they said, we're going to put a prohibition on foreign buyers from buying any residential real estate in Canada for 2 years. And what they're focusing on is the demand side. Let's cut out demand that we don't think is legitimate, so there'll be less demand, and that will ameliorate prices and create more supply for Canadians. And that was the reason for that particular piece of legislation. And it's really, to me, it's political window dressing. So they did come out with it. And in fact, it took them a year and a half to come up with the regulations. And quite interestingly, we tracked them, and all the devil is in the detail of the regulations. And they came out just before Christmas, the 21st of December, when nobody was looking other than a couple of us and some companies, Canadian companies that have foreign ownership. And they came up with the regulation that says not only can a foreign buyer not buy. They can't stop you. The federal government can't stop you from buying, but they can make it very penal. There's penalties, and they can force you to sell it if you've breached the act. And they came out with the regulations just before Christmas. And unfortunately, those regulations went far beyond anything that we would have imagined, because they said a foreign buyer is not a permanent resident, not a Canadian citizen, etc. But it's also a company that has a 3% interest of a non-Canadian. So you have a company that buys a residential unit, and you're 95% Canadian, you have a 5% offshore owner, suddenly you're prohibited as well. Bizarre. But even more than that, they provided that foreign buyers now, so we've now expanded the definition of foreign buyers to these 3% entities, could not buy residential land for development or mixed use. So it meant that foreign capital would be prevented from coming into Canada to buy and develop real estate, which was not the intention. In fact, it's totally counterproductive, because you're now limiting capital, so you'll build less. So how's that going to help supply? So those came out in the regulations that nobody sort of noticed except my office, some other lawyers, and some other developers. And it's taken us 4 months to convince the government of their wayward ways. And they've now, the third thing was they excluded from this 3% public companies, which makes sense. But they didn't include REITs. Now, a lot of REITs are developing land, and REITs are taking ownership, there's no restriction. So the REITs were up in arms as well, too. So they finally, after 4 months of lobbying from CHBA and Build, they changed the regulations to say that it doesn't cover development land and it doesn't cover REITs. And they magnanimously increased the 3% to 10%, which is like, what does that got to do with the time of day? It should be the control. If you look at Ontario on their tax, it's a control mechanism. It's 51% of the voting control or some de facto voting control. That makes sense. But a foreigner that has a small piece of a company, suddenly it taints the whole company. Was a problem. Developers are bringing in lots of capital and teaming up with foreign entities, a lot from Asia, and suddenly they couldn't. Anyways, that's all fixed up about two weeks ago. So that's that's a piece of legislation that's not going to do anything. We already have in the major centers the 25%, and they were never a big factor anyways, but it makes them look good. They spend all this time, a little less time and take some money and pour it into infrastructure would be a lot better. So that's the first piece of.
I've heard some complaints for Americans that own cottages in Grand Bend and Georgian Bay and Muskoka and places like that, that it's negatively impacting them. And then there was a senator in New York State that started to say that if Canada was going to continue with this, he was going to start taxing all the Canadians that have ski places at ski resorts in New York, upper New York State, and cottages at the Finger Lakes, etc. So was this ever meant to impact resort properties?
Well, no, it is restricted. So the prohibition was against buying in areas that have a core population of at least 10,000. So if it's Huntsville and they don't have 10,000, you could cover, you could buy a cottage property, but it depends on the location of the unit. I don't know what Lake Rosso has and what Kawartha Lakes have. You have to go and do the census, go to census from Canada, from the last one, and figure out if you're covered or not, or if you're breaching the law by buying it. I think it's pure political window dressing.
So do you think that foreign buying in the last couple of years has really, sopped up supply or driven pricing up? Or is this a solution looking for a problem?
Look, there are foreign buyers. I think when they looked at the numbers, across in the big areas, it's 3-4%. So now it's dropped to 1 or 2%. So it's made a small dent, but that's really, again, dealing with the demand side. and ignoring the real problem in Ontario, and now coming across Canada, which is supply. We have a lot of people coming in, and we don't have enough houses for those people. And this is really a problem, a solution for trying to find a problem. I fully agree. But
Okay, let's go on.
It's convenient. They don't vote. Foreigners don't vote, so it looks good.
Well, I was actually had a developer tell me that this was going to be a big problem because while foreign buyers weren't a material part, they were an important part that actually got condos to that 80% they needed to get construction financing. And so he actually thought that this would be damaging to supply because it will be more, it'll take more time and be more difficult to get to the amount of sales that he needed to get construction done. And then he said a lot of the foreign buyers actually rented them out. And so what you're doing is you're, number one, making supply less, and number two, you're actually reducing the stock of rental housing. I don't know whether that's true or not, but it's an interesting point of view. Anyway, let's move on to the vacant home tax. Tell us about that.
Well, so that's been again, the federal government, decided that they needed to do something. So they brought in not only the foreign buyer tax, but the underused housing tax, which is aimed again only at foreign owners, and then we'll look at what's a foreign owner, who have properties that they're not renting during the year. And this is again another attempt to show that the federal government is trying to do something. It imposes a 1% tax on the value of the real estate that's sitting there empty for, I think, 6 months or more. And again, it comes up with a definition. There they had the definition of the 10%. Why they had that 10, the other one 3, God only knows. And that's again intended to ensure that you don't have supply that's not being used. And quite frankly, and we can get into it. City of Toronto's imposed one. I think Vancouver has one. Hamilton is putting one together. Ottawa has one. So now the federal government has to get into the picture, but only for foreigners. The municipalities are for everybody. So you and I, particularly in Toronto, every single person of the 6 million homeowners are subject to this tax unless we live in there, or unless we're renovating, or unless there are a certain number of exemptions. But again, this is all, from my perspective, a tremendous effort and creating a whole bureaucracy to monitor whether you're renting your place or not, versus let's get on with the real problem. And let's devote some resources to getting more stuff constructed faster and cheaper. But the feds, again, this is their token effort to try and increase supply by increase rental supply, because they have this vision of all these rich foreigners, who buying houses around the world, and they're sitting on these empty houses, and they come to Toronto 5 times a year, and the rest of the year this house sits empty, or this condominium sits empty. How many are those of those? Most people are buying stuff, or they're keeping it because they just think it's a way to park money and get it out of China or wherever they want to get their money out, and they leave it empty. Again, how much of that is sitting empty? Again, it's a solution for a problem that really is not material, but it makes them look good. Same with City of Toronto. City of Toronto is actually even worse what they've done, because it's everybody. And everybody has to come, and it's created a lot of problems for the City of Toronto one, especially has a lot of problems for even builders. Let's think of a builder. He's got inventory, right? We've got built a condo and we've got 20 units left. Now you may say, well, let's make sure he either sells them or he rents them. We don't want them sitting there empty. Well, and under the City of Toronto housing bylaw, you can't leave them empty for more than 6 months. You have to rent them or sell them. Well, the builder may not want to rent them. The market, let's say the market right now, okay, it's changing, but the last 8 months, he doesn't want to rent them, because then they lose the Terry on warranty, and then they have a lesser value. You may say, you know what, I'll wait for the market to turn around. Interest rates are going to drop. I'll sit on my last 20, 30 units for the next 8, 9 months or a year. I'm okay with that. That's where my profit is. I'd rather not rent them now and devalue them, and I don't want to sell them now because I'm going to take a loss. Well, so there's no exemption for those people. Under the housing, underused housing tax for the federal government. Okay, it's only foreign owners, but there's a lot of foreign developers. There, they do have an exemption for inventory for a period of time. If you built it before, you basically have the rest of the year to sell it. It's a shorter time, but the city has nothing. If your house had a fire and you got to rebuild it or fix it up, maybe you don't have the money. They don't care. If it's sitting more than 6 months and you don't have a building permit, you're not fixing it, you got to pay a tax. Somebody slapped this bylaw.
You got to have a building permit to get the exclusion. What if I'm just doing some, fix ups inside?
And it's sitting empty for this period of time, then no, you got a problem. It's great. It's a terrible bylaw. So I don't know who sat down and figured it out. They didn't talk to Bill. They didn't talk to, I don't know who they talked to, but when you go through it, there's so many holes in it. It's.
What if I think the market for my unit is, $2,500, and it takes me 6-7 months to actually rent it? I can't wait. I gotta rent it for whatever I can get for it, so I don't get the tax.
You have to, well, they look at it on a yearly basis. So you have to file in 23. I think they extended it to the end of February to file. So if you had it empty for more than 6 months in 22, unless you had the exemption, then you're subject to it. And if you decide exactly, the rental market is soft, which a lot of people had during COVID. And they didn't want to rent it. They wanted to wait for the market to go up, because if they rent it at a low rent, you're stuck with it at the current guidelines. And they left it empty. Then yes, they might have to pay a tax for that year. If this year they go and rent it, it's only for the 1 year, but it's 1%. Your property is worth $1 million. What is it? What's 1%? That's $10,000. And there aren't too many properties less than worth $1 million in the city of Toronto.
Leor, we live in a democracy, in a capitalist system where we talk about freedom. We had, a whole bunch of people up in Ottawa 2 years ago yelling freedom, freedom, freedom. If I own something or rent something, frankly, don't I have the right to either live in it or leave it empty? Like, why can someone tell me I don't have the right to go on a cruise around the world for a year?
Well, because there's a social viewpoint that we have a lack of supply, and people that have the resources and have soaked up some type of part of the supply that are not making it available either for themselves because they need them or for others by renting them, are doing a social injustice, and that you can't do that unless you qualify under one of these exemptions. And the exemptions are very limited from the city. They're better in Ottawa. Ottawa's a little better when you go look at it. It's again, we have a housing crisis. Everyone finally has recognized there's a housing crisis. So all of these laws that we're talking about this morning are all dealing with the demand side to try and either this is actually a supply issue. This is a rental supply issue to force you to either sell it or rent it. So that because you've taken part of this very limited supply and you've sterilized it by not doing anything with it. So that's the philosophy. You can say it's socialistic or communistic or whatever, but that's the rationale.
No, but I think the worst thing is that I think that all the Bill 23, Bill 109, the housing task force that you and I chatted about, almost a year ago now, have all said that supply is the issue and government is the problem. And here, government's putting in more regulation, rather than what the housing task force said was, government, get out of the way. We're going to take a break for some messages and come back in just 2 minutes with Leor Margulies. Stay with us, everybody.
Okay.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. Our issue tonight is housing supply and government action to try to change it. Our guest is Leor Margulies, who's head of the real estate legal practice at Robbins Appleby, a law firm here in Toronto. Leor, what about this anti-flipping tax? What's that all about?
Okay, well, this is another. I'm just want to make sure that it's federal. Yes, it's another, a liberal attempt to try to help the housing industry without spending any money. And so this sort of came under the radar because I didn't even know about it till a couple months ago. So I don't know where it came from, but anyways, January 1st, 2023, they passed a law which those of us who have been around in Ontario since the 70s may recall in the 1970s there was a law, it was called the land speculation tax, because we had a housing crisis in the mid-70s where people were really speculating on housing, or at least the feeling was that they were, and was again boosting prices dramatically, making them unaffordable. It's, you know, and what goes around,
What goes around comes around.
Well, it's the same thing. History repeats itself. That was a tax that they imposed on speculation, and it's very similar to this one. It lasted a year, and it was an abject failure in trying to police it. So the Trudeau and his friends have decided, well, let's again take out people from the market that are skewering the marketplace by boosting the price and competing for houses that, you know, the regular people are going to be won't be able to compete because they have other resources. So essentially, if you bought a house subject to certain exemptions, and there's not that many, and I think it's important that we go through them. If you bought a house and you sell it in less than 365 days, where you would otherwise have been treated as a principal residence. You move into the house and you live there for 6 months and you decide, okay, I need a bigger house, so I'm going to sell it. You didn't pay tax because it was a principal residence, presuming that it otherwise qualified. Now it will be treated as business income. So if you buy a house and you sell it in less than 365 days, subject to the exemptions, you have to pay. It's as if you sold it as business income, as if you were a builder selling inventory. So it's fully taxable, which is a huge. That's a huge disincentive to people to flip. So, which is, I think it's actually higher. I have to go back to the 1970s. I don't think it was as dramatic then, but this is pretty dramatic. And then on top of that, you have to report. And if you don't report, you could pay a 50% penalty on top of the tax that would otherwise be payable on business income. But let's say you buy the property and you substantially renovate it. Now that's like 80, 90, that's 90%. And you flip it. Then not only do you have to pay the tax, which you probably would have anyways, because now it's more of a business, but maybe say, you know, I renovated my house and, you know, and me and my wife, we decided, it looks great, but it's still too small, so we're going to sell it. So in those circumstances, okay, that's a little more limited. You not only have to pay full tax, it's not a principal resident. You can say, well, I live there, I changed my mind. No, that doesn't work. You also have to, you're now considered to be a new builder, and new builders have to charge HST. So you have to charge HST on your sale, or if you didn't, you pay for it. Because so obviously, if I'm a purchaser of your renovated home, I'm not going to be paying HST because that's not market. So you're going to have to pay. So technically, you now have to pay full business tax on it, like 100%. So 50, if you're at the 50% tax bracket, your profit will be taxed at 50. Plus, you're going to have to pay 13% HST. On top of it. So they're trying to create disincentives from all these flippers and these renovator flippers who are not if they're really in the business of renovating and selling, then they're going to be charging HST, or they should be, and they're going to be paying tax because that's their business. If I buy and sell houses, and that's my business of I buy an old house, fix it up and sell it, I got to pay business tax anyways. This is for those people that are in the middle that, well, I'm not in that business, but maybe I really am because I bought one of them, I've renovated it substantially. Now I got to pay HST, or technically the purchaser, but he's not going to pay it, so you're going to have to pay it.
But so a lot of these condos get bought up by people that you know are investors, just part-time investors. They're dentists, they're lawyers, they're business people, and they buy a couple of condos. And they flip them. They then sell them, but that's helping getting the condo built. So is that now I got to get taxed on it?
If they hold it for more than a year, less than a year, yes. And it also covers the big business, which was a big business. I think this market has killed it. The assignment business, exactly those people that you talked about who buy units. A lot of them buy units, and then they assign the purchase and sale agreement before they actually close, and they make a profit on it. And those are also covered by this automatic 100% tax. That's if you sell it in the 12 months. Now, if you're a flipper and you do it, let's say after 2 years, you can say, oh, great, I held on to it long enough, so I'm okay. I'm not covered by Bill C-32. That's true. But you're now you go back into the regular income tax rules, which is, was this a business venture or was this an investment? Because either way, you're going to have to pay tax on either capital gains because it was an investment, or if you're in the business of flipping. And CRA has been very, this is one area I think over the last few years they've been delving into the assignment issue, but people buying new pre-construction, flipping the agreements. If they're doing that, they're saying, first of all, you have to pay tax. A lot of them weren't declaring it at all, which is totally legal because it is a gain. It's not a principal residence, and there's at least a capital gain payable. But they're saying, well, you've done this like 5 times in the last 4 years. You bought, sold, bought, sold. That's your business. That's what you're doing. You're in the business of buying and selling real estate through assignments. So that should be 100% taxable. So this tax on the assignments isn't as dramatic an impact, at least legally speaking, on those kind of people who are buying and selling. But now it's saying, let's say I bought it, and I bought it for my daughter, and 6 months later, she says, Dad, I'm moving to Alberta, so I don't need that unit. So I don't want to sit and hold it. So I give it to my agent. I get the builder to let me sell it. That's another story. Let's say it's sold out. Builder says, fine, we'll buy it back and we'll sell it. Suddenly you're taxable.
Well, I guess on the first two we talked about before the break, I agree with you that they're wrong and they're not going to have a positive impact. And it's a solution looking for a problem. On this one, if you are in the business of buying and selling condos and assigning them, or just, fixing them up and selling them, or houses and fixing them up and selling them, you are in that business. And so I think that this principal residence exemption has been overused. And I do think that, anyone in any other business has got to pay tax. The people that are in the house flipping business should pay tax. Not that anything's wrong with house flipping. I think it's good. People should be buying up homes, renovating them, and selling them. But you should be paying tax on them. Right. Anyway, let me ask you about Bill 109. So Bill 109 has this stipulation in it that says that once a application is deemed complete by a municipality, you've only got a certain amount of time before the municipality has to respond to it. And I've been told that this is the provincial government's attempt to get municipalities to speed up the red tape process, which is a positive thing. But what I've been told is that the negative implication, the unexpected result is that, number one, it's taking longer for municipalities to deem applications complete. They're stalling on deeming them complete. And number two, during that time period, they'll just turn it down rather than work with the developer to accept it. So that the provincial government's desire to speed things up is actually going the opposite direction. Any point of view?
Well, that was the one they came in. I think that was one of the first things they did to start streamlining before Bill 23. It was one of the first attempts. And I think they put in penalties that says if you don't approve, move forward the applications within those timeframes, the fees start going down. So it became a financial penalty on the municipalities for not moving it forward. But of course, they did exactly what I said they can do. They control the process. So, to have a complete application for site plan, there's a million things. And you can say, well, this plan is wrong or that plan is wrong. We need this change. Look, and then what are you going to do? You're going to take them to court. So municipalities have resisted significantly on that sort of. There's no carrot there. There's only a stick. You don't move it forward, you get penalized, and this is the result. It's stalling the process. It's classic. But so it goes back to the whole thing. The municipalities have to buy into the need to move the process forward. And to be fair to them, I'm looking at Toronto because that's my biggest familiarity. The planning group is just inundated. They don't have enough people. So they could never meet these, the amount of applications that are going through. And especially in the last 2 years, when they brought in IZ, inclusionary zoning, with a deadline that says if you have your zoning done and your site plan application complete by September 22, you'd be grandfathered. everybody rushed to get their applications through. So they're just buried, right? And now with Bill 23, that's going to expand the amount of rezonings. They're going to be over the next 2 years, if they're not already, more buried. And so they can't handle the demand. And you can pass as many laws as you want that says you got to deal with it. They just don't have the manpower. And somebody has to, and again, this is a provincial and federal thing that the city doesn't have the money to do it.
Okay, last question then. I had 2 presentations last week. One was a developer that said, we think that the right strategy is to to submit applications in whatever the city will approve, because that's the fastest way to get into the ground and get out of the ground and get something sold or rented. And so, we don't do anything other than what the city is allowing in its current zoning. Because to go to the OLT, the Ontario Land Tribunal, to fight with the city takes too much time and too much money. It's not worth it. And so we just do what the city allows. And then another presentation that was the exact opposite. And they said, we'll never get what we want from the city. It's a complete. And so what we do is we just object to the OLT right away. We don't even wait for the city to respond. We object to the OLT right away. What's the right strategy?
Well, it's interesting because I have clients that do both. I have one that will work with the city, work with the councillor, because he doesn't want to go to the OLT, because money, time has a value. And going to the OLT and fighting it out, you might add another 2 or 3 years to the process. So it depends on the nature of the development. If you can work with them and get to it's not only working with them. Remember, they're not the final arbiter. It's the local residents associations. So you've got to be able to get all of them on side. It's a real art to do that. And some as developers are better than that. Others are going to say, everyone tries. To be honest, no developer, even those guys that you mentioned, said, "Oh, we're going to go to the tribunal right away." You can only go to them after a certain point of time. I think 90 or 180 days. But they apply as soon as they're legally allowed to. They're still working. They're still working with the ratepayers and so on, because ultimately, you want to end up with a settlement. So I think. It depends on the development. Unfortunately, the ones that appeal quickly, you generally have to. If you've got something that isn't going to be absorbed by everybody, and generally, unless it's a small development, unless, like they said, if it's within the zoning, then you don't have to. You're just getting site plan. Most things are not within the zoning, because most of the zoning is still antiquated and it's changing. And now with Bill 23 and the transit zones, it's changing even more. So I think in most cases, you're going to have to push to get it done, partly because of the ratepayers, and partly because of the overload that I mentioned in the planning group, that they just can't process it. It's not that they don't want to.
But then it becomes even more legalistic, because it's in a court of law. It's in front of the regulator, and all you're doing is hiring high-priced lawyers like you for $1,000 an hour to negotiate a settlement a little bit of time from now.
I agree, but what's your alternative is to negotiate to the cows come home, and sometimes on these bigger developments. Like I said, 70% of this land is in single family, and people don't want it to change. So you're right. Again, what's the alternative? At least we have the land tribunal. Most places don't. So it's better. It's not perfect. You're right. But without it, you've asked the developers, they would say, I wouldn't be here. It's just the way it operates. So
Leor Margulies from Robbins Apple. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I really appreciate your thoughts on the current real estate market. Okay. It's a fascinating conversation. We're going to take a final break, and I'm going to come back with some concluding comments in just 2 minutes. Stay with us, everybody.